Please don't look at me," she begged. The mafia boss turned her chin gently and promised revenge. The smell of stale coffee and old grease is a perfume I will never get used to. At 2:30 in the morning, the diner was a ghost station, a flickering fluorescent island in the dark ocean of Del Mare Heights. I wiped the same counter for the 10th time, my movements small and automatic. "Keep your head down. Lena, just get through the shift. My name is Lena Moretti. I am 22 years old, and I am invisible." I used to like the quiet of the late shift. It used to be just me and Sal in the kitchen, him grilling onions for the morning prep, me refilling the salt shakers, the radio playing low. Now, the silence is too thin. Every sound makes my shoulders hunch. The heavy swing of the kitchen door, the buzz of the neon sign, the low rumble of a truck gearing down on the street outside. They all sound like footsteps in a dark alley. Marge, the daytime waitress, had left me a note. "Honey, you look pale. Eat something." She was the only one who tried to be kind. The others, they just whispered. I could feel their eyes on my back when I walked to the locker room. I heard the words "last week." Did you see her face? Walking alone in that neighborhood? She must have asked for it. My hand tightened on the damp rag. I kept my gaze fixed on the laminate, swirling the cloth over a stubborn ketchup ring. Don't look up. Don't meet their eyes. If you don't meet their eyes, they can't see you. The bell over the door chimed, a harsh, rusty sound that cut right through me. I flinched, my whole body going rigid, my breath caught in my throat. It was just a customer, a trucker, probably, looking for coffee to get him through to sunrise, but my heart was already pounding, a trapped bird against my ribs. "Just coffee, sweetheart," a gruff voice called out. I nodded, not looking up. I pulled a mug from the rack, my hands shaking so slightly I prayed he could not see it. I filled it, the dark liquid sloshing near the rim. I slid it onto the counter, my eyes focused on his hand as it reached out, a thick-fingered hand, scarred at the knuckles. I started to pull back, but his arm brushed mine. It was nothing, an accident, a simple, careless touch. The mug shattered on the floor. I did not scream. I gasped, a raw, sharp intake of air, and stumbled back, crashing into the cutlery stand. Spoons and forks clattered across the tiles. "Hey, watch it!" Sal bellowed from the kitchen window. "Geez, sweetheart, it's just coffee," the trucker said, raising his hands. No need to get hysterical. But I was not there. I was not in the diner. I was in the alley behind my apartment building. The air smelled like wet garbage and the sharp, metallic tang of cheap whiskey. It was cold. I remembered the grit of the concrete against my palms as I tried to push him away. I remembered the silver ring on his pinky finger. Catching the dim light from the street lamp, I remembered his laugh, low and wet. "You think anyone's looking for you, little mouse?" he'd whispered, his breath hot on my face. "You're nothing. You're nobody." His name was Rico Calderone. I knew his name because I'd seen him before, collecting protection money from the bodega owner on my corner. He was the right-hand man, the enforcer, for a new syndicate crawling its way into the old neighborhoods. They were violent, flashy, and utterly ruthless. They were not like the old families, the ones who operated in shadows and silence. The Calderones wanted to be seen. They wanted to be feared. And I was terrified. I had not gone to the police. The thought was laughable, hysterical in its own right. What would I say? That a man whose face was plastered across the city's underworld had attacked me? The police in this part of Del Mare Heights were either on his payroll or too scared to tie their own shoes without permission. Filing a report would not get me justice. It would get me a gravestone. Rico Calderone's gang threatened anyone who talked. They did not just threaten, they made examples. "Lena, get a broom! You're dripping water everywhere," Sal was shouting again. I looked down. My hands were clamped over my mouth, and tears were streaming down my face, dripping onto the collar of my pale blue uniform. The trucker was staring at me, his expression a mixture of annoyance and pity. I'm sorry," I stammered, grabbing a rag. "I'm sorry, I slipped. I knelt, picking up the large, broken pieces of the mug, my hands trembling so hard I cut my finger on a sharp edge. I watched the drop of bright red blood well up and fall onto the white ceramic. I finished my shift in a daze. I cleaned the glass, scrubbed the floor, and threw out the trash, all on autopilot. Sal did not speak to me again. The trucker left a $5 bill and scurried out. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I walked home. My apartment was only 6 blocks away, but it felt like traversing a continent. Every shadow was a monster. Every distant shout was his voice. The click-clack of my own worn-out shoes on the pavement sounded like someone following me. I held my keys in my fist, the teeth pointing out, a pathetic little weapon against the dark. I made it inside, fumbling with the 3 locks on my door, the deadbolt, the chain, the knob lock, 3 layers of useless comfort. I did not turn on the light. I did not take off my coat. I walked straight to the bathroom. It was my sanctuary and my prison, the small, windowless room with the cracked tile and the dripping faucet. I turned on the shower, turning the handle all the way to hot until steam filled the room. I stripped off my uniform, my clothes, everything, leaving them in a pile by the door as if they were contaminated. I stepped under the scalding spray, the water so hot it stung, but it was not enough. I grabbed the bar of cheap rose-scented soap and I started scrubbing. I scrubbed my arms first, my shoulders, my neck. I scrubbed until my skin was bright red, until it felt raw and peeled. I was not trying to get clean. I was trying to get him off me. I could still feel his hands, his grip on my arms, his fingers tangled in my hair. I could still smell the whiskey. I scrubbed harder, the soap bar wearing down in my frantic hands. I could feel the sting, but it was a good pain. It was a pain I was causing. It was proof that this body was still mine. I finished and stood under the water until it started to run cold. I stepped out, shivering, and wrapped a threadbare towel around me. I avoided the mirror. I always avoided the mirror. But tonight, I slipped. My eyes caught my reflection. The girl staring back was a stranger. Her eyes were huge and hollow, black pools of terror in a face that was too pale. The bruise along her jaw, which I had so carefully covered with concealer for my shift, was now a sickly, blooming mess of purple and yellow. I stared at it. His mark. "Don't look at me," I whispered to the girl in the mirror, my voice a dry rasp. "Please, just don't look at me." I slid down the cool tile of the wall, pulling the towel tighter, but the scrubbing had done nothing. The water had done nothing. I was still dirty. I was still trapped in that alley. I could not get out. The walls of the tiny bathroom seemed to be closing in. The steam was too thick. I could not breathe. My chest seized, a sudden, crushing pressure that stole the air from my lungs. I was dying. He had killed me after all, and I was just dying slowly. A panic I had never known, sharper and colder than the fear in the alley, flooded me. I was having a heart attack. Right here, alone, on my bathroom floor. I crawled out of the bathroom, my limbs heavy and numb. I grabbed my phone from my jeans pocket. I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? I tried to speak, but only a gasp came out. I can't breathe, I managed. My chest. The rest was a blur of noise and lights, the sirens, the heavy boots of the paramedics in my apartment, the stretcher, the bumpy ride. I ended up at St. Jude's, the closest hospital, the one that smelled like disinfectant and despair. The emergency room was chaos. A man was screaming from behind a curtain. A baby was crying. The lights were so bright they hurt my eyes. A nurse, her face kind but tired, was trying to take my blood pressure. "Okay, Lena, just try to breathe slowly. Your heart rate is high, but your EKG looks okay. We think it's a panic attack." She paused, her fingers gently touching the side of my face. "Honey, what happened to your jaw? Did someone do this to you?" Her question was a trigger. The questions, the looks, the whispers. It was the diner all over again, but worse. They would ask me what happened. They would want to know his name. They would call the police. I could not be here. "I have to go," I said, my voice rising. Lena, wait, you need to calm down. I ripped the blood pressure cuff off my arm. I ignored the leads they had stuck to my chest. I scrambled off the gurney. I did not have my shoes. I did not have my coat. I was just in my jeans and the t-shirt I had worn under my uniform. "Ma'am, you can't leave," a security guard shouted. I ran. I did not know where I was going. I just ran, past the triage desk, past the waiting room, until I saw a heavy metal door with a small, wired glass window. Stairwell. I slammed my shoulder into the push bar and tumbled inside. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the noise of the ER. The silence was sudden and complete. It was a concrete shaft, dimly lit by a single caged bulb 1 floor above. It smelled like dust and cold cement. I collapsed on the landing, curling into a ball, my bare feet stinging against the gritty floor. I was shaking, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that rattled my bones. I was cold. I was lost. I just wanted to disappear. I buried my face in my knees and cried. Ugly, silent sobs that tore at my throat. I do not know how long I sat there. It could have been minutes or an hour. Then I heard a sound. It was not the sound of the ER door opening. It came from above. A slow, measured click, click, click on the concrete steps. It was not the rubber sole of a hospital clog or the heavy tread of a security boot. It was the sharp, clean sound of expensive leather shoes. My blood turned to ice. A man, and he was coming down. I pressed myself harder against the wall, trying to become invisible, trying to stop shaking. "Please, just go away," I whispered into my knees. "I don't have any money. Please, just leave me alone." The footsteps stopped. He was on the landing just above me. I could see the razor-sharp crease of his black trousers and the immaculate shine of his Italian leather shoes. They looked bizarrely out of place in the grime of the stairwell. He did not speak. He just stood there. The silence was absolute, heavier and more terrifying than any threat. I could feel him looking at me, a focused, heavy gaze. I risked a glance up. He was tall, dressed in a black suit that seemed to have been tailored just for him. He wore no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. He was not a doctor. He was not a cop. He was something else entirely. He moved, and I flinched, pulling my arms over my head. "Don't!" He stopped instantly. He was still several feet away. Slowly, as if not to startle a feral animal, he shrugged off his suit jacket. It was heavy, dark wool, and it looked impossibly expensive. He held it out. "Take it," he said. His voice was deep, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the concrete. It was quiet, but it filled the entire stairwell. "You're cold." I shook my head, my hair sticking to my wet cheeks. I did not want his coat. I did not want him to see me. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "Please don't look at me." He ignored my plea. He moved in one fluid motion, closing the distance and kneeling in front of me. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for a blow, for a rough hand. But the touch that came was not violent. It was shockingly gentle. His fingers, surprisingly warm, cupped my chin. It was not a question. It was a command. He tilted my head up, forcing me to look at him. I opened my eyes. His face was all hard angles and shadows, a strong jaw, a straight nose, a mouth that looked like it had never smiled, but it was his eyes that held me. They were dark, a deep, impenetrable brown, and they were not kind. They were not soft. They were assessing, intelligent, and utterly intense. He saw everything. He saw the raw, scrubbed skin, the terrified tears, and the ugly purple bruise on my jaw. His gaze flickered to the bruise, and his eyes narrowed, just slightly. A spark ignited in their depths, something cold and ancient and incredibly dangerous. He held my gaze for a long, silent moment, then he spoke, his voice low, a promise forged in steel. "Whoever did this," he said, his thumb brushing my chin just once, "will never touch you again." I stopped breathing. It was not a comfort, it was a vow. It was a sentence being passed. I had heard the whispers in the diner, the rumors that ran through Delmarais Heights like a hidden river, the old families, the silent powers that owned the city before the Calderones had shown up, the Valenci family. And this man, with his quiet intensity and his eyes that held the darkness of the city, could only be one person. Dante Valenci, the ghost. The man they said was more myth than reality. And he was kneeling in front of me in a hospital stairwell, looking at me like I was something. Not something to be broken, but something to be protected. I was so stunned, the tears just stopped. He did not move. He just knelt there, his hand still on my chin, holding me in place with nothing but the force of his will. He pulled a phone from his pocket. Never breaking eye contact with me, he dialed a single number. He spoke in rapid, low Italian. I did not understand a single word, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a pure, unfiltered command. He hung up. Less than 2 minutes later, the stairwell door opened. A woman stood there. She was tall, severe, and beautiful in a black dress. Her dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She looked at Dante, then at me, and her expression did not change. There was no pity, just quiet efficiency. "Sir," she said. Dante nodded. He stood, brushing invisible dust from the knees of his perfect trousers. He took his heavy wool jacket and draped it over my shoulders. The warmth was immediate, seeping into my frozen skin. It was heavy, a tangible weight, and it smelled of expensive cologne, wool, and something metallic, like the air before a storm. "Sophia will take you home," he said to me. It was not a suggestion. Sophia stepped forward and offered me a hand. I took it. Her grip was strong. She pulled me to my feet and my legs almost buckled. She held me steady, the coat a protective shroud around me. Dante Valenci stepped back, melting into the shadows of the landing. He just watched as Sophia guided me out a different door, an emergency exit that led to a dark alley. A black sedan was waiting, the engine idling. The drive to my apartment was silent. Sophia seemed to know exactly where I lived without me saying a word. She walked me to my door, took my keys from my hand. I did not even remember grabbing them, and unlocked the 3 locks. She guided me inside, to the center of my small, dark living room. "He said to give you this," she said, her voice crisp and low. She handed me a small, heavy black phone. It was not a smartphone. It was a burner. "This number is the only one programmed in it." She tapped a small sticky note attached to the back. "Use it if you need anything, if you are scared." She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. She looked back at me, her dark eyes analytical. "And he said not to speak to the police. Not yet." Her voice dropped even lower. "They cannot protect you. He can—" The door clicked shut, the deadbolt slid into place. I stood alone in my apartment, wrapped in a coat that cost more than my rent for a year. The burner phone was heavy in my hand. For the first time in 7 days, I was not crying. I was not scrubbing my skin raw. I was just numb. The scent of his cologne filling my lungs, my entire world tilting on its axis. I was holding on to a promise made by a ghost, a man who had looked at me, really looked at me, and had not turned away. I had to go back. I spent 2 days in the silence of my apartment, wrapped in a coat that did not belong to me, holding a phone that connected me to a ghost. I ate crackers and drank tap water. I sat on my sofa, staring at the 3 locks on my door, and I waited. I do not know what I was waiting for Rico Calderone to kick the door in, or for Dante Valenci to reappear. Neither happened. On the 3rd day, my money ran out. The panic of poverty was an old, familiar ache, almost a comfort compared to the new, sharp terror of Rico. I had rent to pay. I had bills. I was a waitress. If I did not work, I did not eat. If I did not show up, I would be fired. I took off Dante's coat, folding it carefully and placing it on my bed. It felt like taking off a suit of armor. I put on my uniform, the pale blue cotton smelling of cheap detergent. I covered the bruise on my jaw with the last of my concealer. It was a poor mask. The purple and yellow still bloomed underneath. A visible stain. Walking to the diner was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every step was a battle. The late afternoon sun felt too bright, exposing me. Every car that slowed, every man who looked at me for a second too long, sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I pushed open the diner door at 4:50, 10 minutes early for my 5 o'clock shift. The diner was quiet, caught in the lull before the dinner rush. Sal was in the kitchen, his back to me. Marge was not behind the counter. Instead, a man I had never seen before was perched on her usual stool, smoking a cigarette and reading the racing Form. He was thin, with slicked back hair and a cheap suit that was too tight in the shoulders. He looked up as I walked in, and his eyes, small and dark, crawled over me. "You're Lena," he said. It was not a question. I just nodded, my throat tight. I moved toward the locker room to put my bag away. "I'm Vince," he called after me. "I'm the new manager. Marge decided to take an early retirement." I froze. Marge had worked here for 20 years. She would not retire without a party, without a cake. "Oh," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That's nice." "Yeah, nice," he sneered, taking a long drag from his cigarette. He looked pointedly at my jaw. "Had a rough week, didn't you? Walk into a door?" I stared at him. The sick, oily feeling of the alley, of Rico's whiskey-soaked breath, washed over me. "Something like that," I mumbled, turning away. "My cousin Rico tells me to watch out for you," he said, his voice casual. "Says you're clumsy, prone to accidents." My blood stopped. I turned back to him, my whole body shaking. He was Rico's cousin. They had not just scared Marge away, they had replaced her. They had put a spider in the center of my web. "He worries about the neighborhood," Vince continued, smiling a smile that did not touch his cold eyes. "Hates to see a mess. Hates it when people talk about things that ain't their business. You understand me, Lena?" I was not in my diner. I was not in my neighborhood. I was in his territory. I was surrounded. I could not breathe. It was the hospital stairwell all over again. The walls were closing in. I could feel Sal's eyes on me from the kitchen window, but he did not move. He did not say anything. He was scared, too. I have to go," I stammered, backing away from the counter, fumbling for the door. "Hey," Vince shouted, sliding off the stool. "Your shift just started. You walk out, you're done. And trust me, you don't want to be done around here." The threat was clear. It was not just about a job. It was about my life. I was trapped. I ran. I did not run out the door. I ran to the back, into the cramped, musty locker room, and slammed the door. I locked it. I leaned against the metal, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. He was here. He was everywhere, and he had taken my job, my safety, my city. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I was going to die. He was going to find me, and he was going to finish what he started, and no one would even look for me. Then my hand, shaking in my pocket, brushed against the hard plastic of the burner phone. He said not to speak to the police. He can protect you. Sophia's words, Dante's promise. I did not know him. He was a killer. He was the most feared man in Delmare Heights. He was everything I should have run from. But he was the only person who had looked at me and not seen something broken. He had seen something worth a promise. My desperation was a drowning wave, and his phone was the only piece of driftwood in the storm. I pulled it out. My fingers were slick with sweat, and I almost dropped it. I pressed the small green button. There was only one number. I pressed call. It rang once, twice. Yes. His voice was just one word, low and sharp, no greeting. "It's me. It's Lena," I whispered, crying so hard I could barely speak. "From the hospital. I'm at the diner. He's here. Rico's cousin. He's the new manager. He threatened me. I'm locked in the locker room. I don't know what to do." There was a silence on the other end, but it was not an empty silence. It was the sound of a blade being sharpened. "Stay there," Dante said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "Do not unlock that door for anyone but me. Do you understand?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm 15 minutes away." He hung up. I sat on the cold floor, the phone clutched in my hand, listening to the muffled sounds of the diner. I could hear Vince yelling, "Get back to work, Sal!" I heard the bell over the door chime a few times. Customers. And then, exactly 15 minutes later, I heard the bell chime again. But this time, the diner went completely silent. The clatter of plates stopped. Sal's radio in the kitchen was abruptly shut off. The low murmur of the customers died. I held my breath. A moment later, a soft, polite knock came at the locker room door. "Lena?" It was his voice. My legs felt like water, but I stood up. I fumbled with the lock and pulled the door open. Dante Valenci was standing there. He was not in the shadows of a stairwell this time. He was under the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner, and he looked even more unreal. He wore a dark gray suit, a black shirt, and no tie. He was completely alone. No bodyguards, no muscle. He did not need it. His presence was a physical weight that pressed all the air out of the room. Vince was standing by the counter, his smug expression gone, replaced by a mask of pale, sickly fear. The two customers at a booth were staring at their plates. Sal was invisible in the kitchen. Dante did not look at Vince. He did not look at anyone else. His dark eyes found mine. "It's time to go," he said softly. I nodded, grabbing my bag. I stepped out from the locker room, and he placed his hand on the small of my back. It was not a casual touch. It was a brand. It was a statement to the entire room. She is with me. I felt the warmth of his hand through my thin uniform, and I flinched, but I did not pull away. I walked with him, his hand guiding me, steadying me. We reached the front door. Vince, trying to reclaim some shred of his paper-thin authority, took a step forward. "Hey," Vince said, his voice cracking. "She's on the clock. She can't just—" Dante stopped. He did not turn his whole body, just his head. He looked at Vince. It was the first time he had acknowledged him, and the sheer, cold intensity of that gaze made Vince physically recoil. "She is taking a personal leave," Dante said, his voice quiet, but it carried to every corner of the silent diner. "Effective immediately. You will not contact her. You will not ask about her. You will not speak her name. Do you understand me?" Vince just nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked like a child who had just been caught by the principal. Dante turned his back on him. A final, complete dismissal. He opened the front door for me and guided me out onto the street. A black sedan, sleek and dark as night, was idling at the curb. He opened the back door for me, and I slid in. He got in beside me. The car pulled away from the curb so smoothly I barely felt it move. I looked out the back window. Vince was standing in the diner doorway, just a small, pathetic silhouette, watching us go. The drive was silent. I looked at my hands, twisted in my lap. I was shaking again, the adrenaline leaving my body, leaving me cold and empty. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere safe," he replied, looking straight ahead. We drove for 20 minutes, away from my neighborhood, away from the grime and the fear, to a part of Del Mar Heights I had only ever seen in magazines. The buildings were glass and steel, soaring into the sky. The car pulled into a private underground garage, and we took a silent, wood-paneled elevator straight up. The doors opened directly into a penthouse apartment. It was vast. The entire wall in front of me was glass, floor to ceiling, looking out over the entire city. The furniture was minimal, expensive and cold, all white and chrome and black leather. It was beautiful. But it was not a home. It was a fortress in the sky. Sophia was there, waiting. She had several large shopping bags at her feet. "Everything is ready, sir," she said to Dante. "Thank you. Sophia, you can go." She nodded and left through a different door, leaving us alone. Dante turned to me. "This is a safe house. No one in the city knows I own this property. The elevator requires a key card. No one can get up here." He motioned to the bags. "Sophia bought you some things. Clothes, toiletries, whatever else you need. You just ask." He walked to the gleaming, empty kitchen. "The kitchen is stocked. There is food. There is wine. Eat, Sleep. Do whatever you need to do." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You are safe here, Lena, but you need to understand one thing." I waited. "You do not have to talk about what happened," he said, his voice quiet. "Not to me, not to Sophia, not to anyone. You do not have to relive it to justify my help. Just rest." And with that, he turned and walked to the elevator. He swiped his card, the doors opened, and he was gone. I was alone, in a multi-million-dollar apartment with a view of a city that was trying to kill me. I spent the next few days as a ghost in a gilded cage. I explored the apartment, which felt as sterile as a museum. I took a shower in a bathroom made of black marble. The water pressure so high it almost hurt. I found the clothes Sophia had bought. Simple things, soft knit sweaters, black leggings, t-shirts, and pajamas. They were all new, and they all fit perfectly. I ate. I slept in a bed that felt like a cloud, but my sleep was haunted. Sophia came by once a day for exactly 10 minutes. She brought fresh groceries and took away the trash. She was polite, efficient, and cold. I learned about Dante Valenci in whispers. One afternoon, a man came to the service entrance. I heard his voice, a low murmur, speaking to the guard, a man named Luca, who stood outside my door 24/7. I crept closer, pressing my ear to the heavy wood. "I don't get it," the visitor's voice said. "Why all this for a diner waitress? The boss has never cared about stuff like this. It's not business." Luca's reply was low and rough. "You don't know the boss. He's protective. You're his. You're safe forever. You cross him. You're dust." "But Rico Calderone is a dead man," Luca said flatly. "He just doesn't know it yet. The boss is untouchable, brutal. He'll handle this his way, quietly. This girl is just part of it. Now get back to your post." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. Brutal, untouchable, dead man. Dante was not just protecting me. He was hunting. He visited every night. He would let himself in with his key. So quietly I would not hear him until he was already in the room. He never stayed long. He would stand by the glass wall, looking out at the city lights, his hands in his pockets. "Did you eat?" he would ask. "Yes." "Do you need anything?" "No." He would nod, and then he would leave. He never asked me a single question about that night. On the fourth night, I fell asleep on the sofa. I had not meant to. I was just watching the tiny, glittering lights of the cars far below, and I drifted off. The nightmare was worse than ever. I was in the alley. It was cold, but this time, when Rico grabbed me, he had Vince's face. He was laughing. "You're done, Lena, you're done." I woke up with a gasp, sitting bolt upright, my hands clenched. I was shivering, covered in a cold sweat. It was just a dream, I screamed, scrambling back against the sofa cushions. Dante was standing across the room, by the window, a dark silhouette against the glittering city. He must have just let himself in. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I didn't hear you." "I just arrived," he said, his voice low. He watched me, his gaze analytical. "You're cold." He walked to a nearby armchair, picked up a thick, impossibly soft cashmere blanket, and walked toward me. I flinched as he got closer. I could not help it. He was a man, and he was too close. He stopped, seeing the fear in my eyes. He did not retreat. He just knelt, bringing himself lower than me, a gesture of submission that was utterly at odds with the power he radiated. He knelt beside the sofa. "You are safe, Lena," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Here, in this room. No one can touch you." He held out the blanket. I looked at him, the man they called brutal, the man who ordered executions. He was kneeling on the floor, offering me a blanket. The nightmare was still clinging to me, but the reality of him, so calm and so present, began to push it away. Slowly, my hand shaking, I reached out, but I did not take the blanket. I touched his chest. I do not know why I did it. I needed to know he was real. I needed to know that the man who had promised me vengeance was not just another ghost. My fingers splayed against the fine wool of his suit, Underneath, his chest was solid, immovable. I could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart. It was not pounding like mine. It was slow, calm, like the rhythm of the ocean. He did not move. He let me touch him. The stillness in him, the absolute lack of fear, flowed into me. My shaking began to subside. "Why?" I whispered, my hand still on his chest. "Why are you doing this for me? I'm nobody." His eyes, which were usually so dark and guarded, flickered. The stillness broke, just for a second, and I saw something beneath it, something raw and old and full of pain. He covered my hand with his. His skin was warm, his grip strong but not crushing. "Because no one did for my sister," he said, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. He looked away from me, toward the dark window, but I knew he was not seeing the city. She was young, different circumstances, same kind of man, a man who liked to break things he thought no one would miss. His jaw tightened, the muscle clenching. He looked back at me, and his eyes were the ones I had seen in the stairwell. They were the eyes of a judge. "I was too late to help her," he said, his voice hard. "I'm not too late for you. I don't let men like that walk anymore." My breath caught. It was not charity. It was not a game. It was penance. I was a second chance. I was the ghost of his sister. The intimate, fragile moment was shattered by the vibration of his phone. He pulled it from his pocket, his expression instantly hardening as he read the screen. He stood up in one fluid motion, walking to the window. "What?" he answered. He listened, his back to me. I watched the rigid line of his shoulders. "He's stupid," Dante said, his voice a cold slice of steel. "He burned the dry cleaner on 8th because the owner pays me rent. Tell my cousin Sal to double his security, pay for all the damages, and find out who else he's squeezed. Rico is getting desperate." He hung up and turned to me. "He knows you're with me," he said. "Rico, he's furious. He thinks he can pressure me by hurting shop owners." He let out a short, cold laugh. "He's wrong." A new kind of fear settled in me. People were getting hurt because of me. The next 2 days were a blur of tension. Dante was not there, but the apartment felt like it was holding its breath. I knew he was moving, reacting. I just did not know how. On the 3rd night, I was in the kitchen, trying to force myself to eat. I was standing at the counter, stirring a bowl of soup I did not want. And then the world exploded. It was not a sound, it was a physical force, a deafening, gut-punching whump that seemed to come from below. The floor-to-ceiling windows bowed inward, held for a split second, and then shattered. A million knives of glass flew into the apartment. The air turned white with dust and smoke. The shriek of a car alarm from the street, 30 stories below, was a thin, piercing wail under the roar of the explosion. I was thrown to the marble floor. My ears were ringing, a high-pitched, painful whine. I could not hear. I could not breathe. The soup bowl was smashed next to my head. I was back in the alley. I was screaming, but I could not hear myself. A dark shape materialized through the swirling dust. It was Dante. He was moving, not with panic, but with a terrible, focused rage. He must have been in the living room. He did not run from the windows. He ran through the raining glass. He did not say a word. He just tackled me, slamming my body back to the floor, covering me completely with his own, his heavy suit jacket. His weight, his solidness, was a shield as a secondary cascade of glass and window frame rained down around us. I was hysterical, sobbing into his shirt, my hands clawing at his back. He lifted his head, his face inches from mine. His eyes were black with fury. He shouted over the ringing in my ears. "Are you hurt? Lena, are you hurt?" "No, no," I screamed. "It was a car bomb," he yelled, his voice a guttural snarl. "In the garage, meant for my car. He knew I was here. He targeted the building. He tried to kill you." He was wrong. He tried to kill him, but in doing so, he tried to kill me. Dante scrambled to his feet, pulling me up as if I weighed nothing. "This place is compromised. We're leaving. Now?" He was not gentle. He was urgent, his grip iron on my arm. He pulled me, barefoot and covered in dust, toward the service exit, not the main elevator. He kicked the door open. Luca, the guard, was there, his gun drawn. "Stairs," Dante snapped. "Now." We ran down 30 flights of concrete stairs. My bare feet were cut and bleeding. I did not care. We burst out into a dark, narrow alley. A different car, a heavy, armored-looking truck, was waiting. Dante shoved me in the back and jumped in the driver's seat. We tore out of the alley, the tires smoking. I huddled in the back, wrapped in the cashmere blanket I had been using on the couch, which Dante had grabbed on the way out. We drove fast, leaving the city lights behind. We drove for 30 minutes, climbing into the dark, wooded hills outside Del Mar Heights. Dante was silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He was radiating a cold, dark fury that was more terrifying than the explosion. Finally, we slowed, turning onto a private road. Massive iron gates loomed in the headlights. They swung open without a sound. We drove up a long, winding driveway, surrounded by dark trees, and then I saw it. It was not a house. It was a fortress, a sprawling estate of old, dark stone covered in ivy. It looked like it had been standing for 100 years. I saw men, dark shapes with earpieces, patrolling the perimeter. Dante stopped the car and came around to open my door. He pulled me out, his hand on my arm. Sophia was standing at the massive arched front door, her face pale but calm. He walked me inside. The interior was nothing like the apartment. It was warm. The floors were dark wood, covered in rich-colored rugs. The walls were lined with books. A fireplace roared at the far end of a vast living room. It smelled of old wood, lemon oil, and safety. It was a home. Dante turned me to face him, his hands gripping my shoulders. He was covered in dust, and there was a small cut on his cheek from the glass. He did not seem to 1_100 notice. He looked into my eyes, and the fury was still there, but it was banked now, like hot coals. "This is my home," he said, his voice low and absolute. "He will not find you here. You will not be moved again. You will be safe." He paused, and his grip tightened, a vow being sealed in the flesh. "I swear it." The first few days at the estate were spent in a fog. The explosion had left a high-pitched ringing in my ears, a constant, thin whine that underscored the terrifying silence of the house. This place, his home, was nothing like the glass penthouse. The penthouse had been a sterile, cold box in the sky, a place to hide. This was a fortress of old stone and dark, polished wood. It was built into the hillside, surrounded by acres of dark trees that seemed to drink the sunlight. It was beautiful, but it was the beauty of a sleeping predator. It was also filled with people. They were quiet, dark-suited men who materialized in doorways and disappeared down hallways. They were the guards, Luca among them, their faces hard and unreadable. Sophia was here, running the household with a terrifying, silent efficiency. There was also an older woman, Mrs. Bianchi, who was the cook. She had a kind, round face but sad eyes, and she spoke to me only in polite, broken English. For the first 48 hours, I stayed in the guest suite Dante had given me. It was larger than my entire apartment, with a fireplace, a massive bed, and windows that looked out over a vast walled garden. I just sat, wrapped in that cashmere blanket, and I shook. On the third morning, I woke up, and the ringing in my ears was gone. In its place was just silence and the distant caw of a crow. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of shame. I was hiding again. I was the girl in the stairwell, the girl in the locker room, and now I was the girl in the guest suite. I was a ghost, haunting the edges of Dante Valenzi's life, a problem he had to manage. I got up. I showered, scrubbing the dust of the explosion from my skin. I put on the clean, simple clothes Sophia had laid out for me, and then I left the room. I needed to do something. I needed to feel my hands work. I needed to be something other than the victim in the spare room. I found my way to the kitchen, was an enormous room, all copper pots and stainless steel, but it had a warmth the rest of the house lacked. Mrs. Bianchi was there, kneading a massive mound of dough. She looked up, surprised, as I entered. "Good morning," I said, my voice hoarse. "Ah, Miss Lena, you are awake. You want breakfast? I will make you eggs." "No, thank you," I said, moving closer. Can I help you? I'm not very good, but I can chop vegetables or wash dishes." She looked at me, her hands still working the dough, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, a small, sad smile. She tore off a piece of dough and handed it to me. "You know how to knead?" I nodded. So I stood beside her in the quiet, sun-filled kitchen, and I worked the dough. I pushed and pulled, folded and turned, the simple, repetitive motion, a balm to my frayed nerves. We worked in silence for almost an hour. That was the start. I began to live. I did not just hide. I explored. I spent hours in the walled garden, a wild, overgrown place that was half forgotten. I found old rose bushes, a crumbling stone bench, and a patch of wild mint. The air was clean, and I could not hear the city at all. I started helping Mrs. Bianchi every morning. I learned to make her tomato sauce, a recipe she said had been in her family for 200 years. She taught me the Italian names for the herbs I picked from the garden. I even started talking to the guards, just a small good morning to Luca when he stood outside Dante's office, or a nod to Marco, a man I saw only in flashes. Marco was different from the others. He was leaner, younger, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. He was not just muscle, he was a shadow. I learned from overhearing Sofia that he was Dante's capitano, his most trusted man, the one who handled things Dante could not touch. Dante himself, I barely saw. He was gone for most of the day, and he returned late at night. The house would grow tense before his arrival. I felt his presence like a drop in barometric pressure. He was hunting Rico, and the hunt was consuming him. One night, almost a week after the bombing, I could not sleep. The house was finally still. I went down to the kitchen, seeking the comfort of its familiar smells. Dante was there. He was sitting at the massive wooden kitchen table, alone in the dark. A single light was on above the stove. A glass of amber liquid was in his hand. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie gone, his collar undone. He looked exhausted. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes, usually so sharp and guarded, seemed heavy. "Sorry," I whispered, backing away. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "Stay," he said. His voice was rough. I hesitated, then slowly walked to the counter. I took down a glass and filled it with water. My hands were steady. I was not afraid of him. Not anymore. "You couldn't sleep either," he stated. It was not a question. "No?" I leaned against the counter, 20 feet away from him. The silence stretched, filled only by the low hum of the refrigerator. "Why didn't you go to the police, Lena?" he asked, his voice quiet, not leaving the small circle of light where he sat. "After it happened." The question was so direct, so unexpected, it stole my breath. He had promised I would not have to talk about it. "You don't have to answer," he said quickly, as if sensing my panic. "It's just, I've been trying to understand why you called me." I looked down at the glass of water in my hands. The kitchen was my safe place. This was where I was rebuilding myself. I could be honest here. "I was afraid," I said, my voice small. "You know that. I was afraid of him." "Not just of him," Dante said, his gaze fixed on the liquid in his glass. "You were afraid of what would happen if you talked." "Yes," I whispered. I took a shaky breath. "Because no one would have believed me. Not really. I'm a waitress. I live in a bad neighborhood. I don't have any money. I don't have any family. I'm a nobody. Rico Calderone. He's the son of a gangster. He has money. He has power. He has cousins who manage diners." I looked at him, and for the first time I let him see the raw, bitter humiliation of it. "Who do you think they would believe? They would have said I asked for it. They would have said I wanted his money. They would have ruined my name, and then his family would have ruined me. I knew I was alone. I knew no one powerful would ever care about someone like me. Dante was silent. He slowly lifted his glass and drained it. He stared at the empty glass for a long time. "You're wrong about one thing," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You're not alone, but you were right about the rest." He stood up and walked to the counter, placing his glass near the sink. He was only a few feet from me now. "My world, the world I grew up in," he said, his gaze distant. "It was full of men like him, full of people who smiled at pain, people who thought that because you could take something, you should—" That power was just a tool to hurt people who didn't have any. He turned to face me. The anger I had seen in him before was there, but it was old. It was a deep, settled part of his bones. "I hate them," he said, the words so simple, so full of cold venom. "I hate their weakness. I hate their noise, and I hate that they make people like you feel small." He lifted his hand slowly, as if not to startle me. He gently cupped my cheek, his palm warm, his fingers calloused. It was the same touch from the stairwell, but it was not a command this time. It was a comfort. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone, just beneath my eye. "You are not small, Lena," he whispered. My heart was pounding. His dark eyes were fixed on mine, and the space between us was electric, charged with all the things we were not saying. He was so close. I could smell the faint scent of whiskey on his breath, mixed with the clean, sharp smell of him. He was not looking at me like I was broken. He was looking at me like I was rare. I leaned into his touch, just slightly. My eyes fluttered closed. I felt his other hand come up to my waist, his grip firm, steadying me, pulling me just an inch closer. I could feel the warmth of his body. His head dipped down, and I knew he was going to kiss me. I held my breath, waiting. "Sir, apologies." My eyes flew open. Dante's hands dropped from me as if he had been burned, and he spun around. Luca was standing in the kitchen doorway, his face pale and apologetic. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on his boss. "What is it?" Dante's voice was a whip crack of cold fury. The warm, tired man from a second ago was gone. The boss was back. "It's Marco, sir. He's back. He has news. It's bad." Dante's jaw tightened. He looked at me once, his expression impossible to read, and then he was gone, sweeping past Luca and disappearing down the hall. I let out the breath I had been holding, my legs suddenly weak. I gripped the counter, my heart aching with a strange, new kind of loss. I did not see him for 2 days. The house was on edge. Men I had never seen before arrived in dark cars. Voices were kept low. Dante was in his office, and the door remained closed. I found out what happened from an overheard conversation between Luca and another guard. Rico Calderone's gang had made a move, a real one. They had taken over a shipping warehouse in the old port, a territory that had belonged to the Valenci family for 50 years. They had walked in, beaten Dante's men, and spray-painted the Calderone crest on the wall. It was not just pressure anymore. It was an open challenge. It was a declaration of war. I found Dante in his office on the 3rd night. The door cracked open. I knocked softly. "Enter." He was standing in front of a massive dark wood desk, looking at a map of the city. Marco was with him, standing in the corner, silent as a statue. "I heard what happened," I said, my voice small. Dante did not look up from the map. "You shouldn't have—" Are you going to hurt them?" I asked, twisting my hands together. He looked up then. His face was a cold, hard mask. "I'm going to end them. Marco is handling the logistics." "Please," I begged, stepping into the room. "Please don't. This is because of me. If you just let me go, if I disappear, he'll stop." Dante laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound. "You think this is about you? Not anymore. He's weak, and he's desperate, and he made a mistake. He thinks he can take what is mine. He thinks he can make me look weak. He cannot." "But it's violence," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. It's a war. People will get hurt, all because he hurt me. Dante moved from behind the desk, closing the distance between us in 2 long strides. He stopped directly in front of me, forcing me to tilt my head back to look at him. His voice was low, firm, and utterly devoid of mercy. He made it about you the second he touched you. He put his hands on someone who was under my protection. He did not know it, but he did. Then he bombed a building with you inside it. Now he takes my territory. The time for quiet is over. I don't want this, I pleaded. I don't want you to be the monster he is. I am nothing like him, he snarled, his anger finally breaking the surface. He is a child breaking things for fun. I am a king protecting his borders. Go to your room, Lena. This part does not concern you. The words were a slap. Go to your room. I was dismissed. I was the child. I turned and fled, humiliation and fear burning in my throat. I left him and Marco to their maps and their war. That night, I found him again. It was much later. The house was dead quiet. I knew he was not in his office, and I knew he was not in his bed. I found him on a stone terrace at the back of the house, overlooking the dark, silent valley. He was leaning against the balustrade, a bottle of whiskey on the stone beside him, a glass in his hand. He was alone, staring into the blackness. He heard me approach, but he did not turn. I walked up to him, my fear gone, replaced by a quiet ache. He was so alone, the king on his lonely rampart. I stood beside him. I did not say anything. I just watched the wind move through the dark trees below. After a long time, I slowly, tentatively, placed my hand over his, the one that was resting on the cold stone. His skin was warm. He flinched, just slightly, but he did not pull away. He turned his head to look at me. His eyes were dark, and the anger was gone. All that was left was that deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Thank you, I whispered. His brow furrowed. For what? For yelling at you? No, for seeing me. I tightened my hand over his. In the stairwell, in the diner, even when you're angry, you look at me, and you see me. No one has ever done that. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. He searched my face, as if looking for a lie. He found none. Slowly, he set his glass down. He turned, his body facing mine. He lifted his hand and cupped my jaw, his touch as gentle as it had been in the kitchen. Lena, he breathed, his voice rough. He leaned in, and this time, there was no one to interrupt. His lips touched mine. It was not a rough, demanding kiss. It was slow burning and hesitant, as if he was tasting something he knew he should not have. It was soft, and it was full of a terrible, quiet sadness. I tasted the whiskey on his lips, sharp and smoky, and underneath it, just him. I did not pull back. I pressed into him, my free hand coming up to rest on his chest, over his heart. It was beating, fast and heavy, not at all the calm, steady rhythm I had felt before. He was not calm, he was breaking. The kiss deepened, a slow, intimate exploration. His other hand came up, burying in my hair, holding my head as he slanted his mouth over mine. It was not the kiss of a king or a killer. It was the kiss of a drowning man. He pulled back, just enough to rest his forehead against mine. We were both breathing heavily. You should go inside, he whispered. His eyes closed. I am not a good man. Lena? I am not asking you to be, I whispered back. I'm just asking you to be here. I rose on my toes and kissed him again. And this time, it was my choice. It was not a thank you. It was not a plea. It was a statement. I was not the girl in the stairwell anymore. I was not broken. He groaned, a low sound in his chest, and his arms wrapped around me, crushing me against him. He lifted me from the ground and carried me from the terrace, through the dark, silent house and into his room. He did not turn on the lights. The only illumination came from the moon, casting long, pale rectangles on the floor. He set me down beside his bed. His hands framed my face, and he just looked at me, his eyes dark and hungry in the shadows. This was not rushed. It was not wild. It was slow and raw and desperate. He undressed me with hands that were shaking, his touch reverent, as if he were handling something priceless, and I, in turn, unbuttoned his shirt, my fingers brushing against the warm, hard skin of his chest. It was my choice. It was my moment of reclaiming. Every touch was a question, and every response was a permission. He followed my lead. When I hesitated, he slowed. When I pressed closer, he met me. This was not about power. It was about trust. It was not the frenzied act of a man taking. It was the slow, deliberate, emotionally raw surrender of two people who had nothing left but each other. I was in control. For the first time since I'd walked down that alley, I was making the choice. My body was my own, and I was choosing to share it with him. He laid me back on the cool sheets, and when he finally came to me, it was with a tenderness that shattered the last of my defenses. It was a quiet claim, a silent vow in the dark, and when it was over, I did not feel dirty. I did not feel ashamed. I felt whole. He pulled me against his side, his heart hammering against my ear, his arm a heavy, protective weight across my waist. I fell asleep in his bed, in his arms, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly safe. I woke up to sunlight streaming into the room. Dante was already gone, but the imprint of his body was still warm beside me. I found him in the dining room with Marco. The tension was back, thicker than before. Marco was standing, his face grim. Dante was sitting at the head of the table, a cup of coffee untouched in front of him. He looked at me as I entered, and his expression was a complex mixture of regret and cold resolve. "Lena, sit down," he said. I sat. Marco nodded at me, his eyes full of a strange pity. "Marco has new information," Dante said, his voice flat. "Rico is smarter than I thought, or just luckier." "What is it?" I asked, my newfound peace evaporating. "He's not just trying to take territory," Marco said, his voice crisp. "He's planning a partnership with the Orvallo cartel. He's offering them a foothold in Del Mare Heights, using the port warehouse as a starting point." I did not know who they were, but I saw the look on Dante's face. "They are not children breaking windows," Dante explained, his voice cold. "They are butchers. They will flood this city with drugs and death, and Rico is their key." "But why would they partner with him?" I asked. "He's weak." "Because he is using your silence as leverage," Dante said, and his words were like ice. "He's spinning a story. He's telling them that I am weak, that he attacked a woman under my protection, and I did nothing, that I've hidden you away because I'm afraid of him. He's using my discretion to protect you as a sign that I've lost my grip. If the cartel believes him, they will back him, and they will come for all of us." I felt sick. "So what do you do?" Dante looked at me, his dark eyes holding mine. He was not my lover from the night before. He was the boss. "He's trapped me. Lena, if I kill him now, the cartel will see it as confirmation. They'll see it as me silencing him. They will start a war. If I do nothing, he wins. My reputation is destroyed, and they start a war anyway." He paused, and I knew what was coming. "There is only one way. He wins by reputation, so I must destroy his... I don't need to kill him. I need to expose him." He leaned forward. "I need your testimony. Lena, I need the truth. I need you to record your story. Every detail. Not for the police. For them. For the cartel. I will make sure they hear what kind of man they are getting into business with. I will prove he is not a partner. He is a liability." My blood ran cold. He was asking me to do the one thing I had run from. He was asking me to go back to that alley, to say the words, to give voice to the nightmare. I looked at his face, the face of the man who had pulled me from the stairwell, the man who had held me while I slept. He was not asking me as a boss. He was asking me as the only man who had ever seen me. I straightened my back. My voice trembled, but I held his gaze. "Okay," I said, "I'll do it." The office was the only room in the house that felt cold. Unlike the warm woods of the library or the soft rugs of the living areas, Dante's office was a place of steel, glass, and shadow. It was his command center, and I had never been invited in until today. He did not ask me to sit at the massive, empty desk. Instead, he led me to a small, leather sofa against the far wall. Between us, on a low glass table, sat a small, black digital recorder. It looked like a tiny, sleeping insect. Dante sat in an armchair opposite me. He did not look at the recorder. He looked at me. "It is only for my ears, and for the ears of one man in Mexico," he said, his voice low and steady. "No one else. This will not be in a courtroom. This will not be on the news. This is for us." I nodded, my throat so tight I could not speak. "You do not have to do this," he said, his eyes searching mine. It was the last time. He was giving me an exit. I thought of the car bomb. I thought of the warehouse, of the men who had been beaten because of me. I thought of his sister, the ghost who lived in the silence between his words. I took a shaky breath and reached out, my finger brushing the small, red button. "I do. Just tell me what happened." "Lena," he said softly, "from the moment you left the diner, I am right here." He pressed the button. A tiny red light blinked on. I started to speak. My voice was a thin, dry whisper. I told him about the walk home, about the chill in the air. I told him about the alley, the smell of wet garbage, and then I told him about the footsteps. I had to stop. The room was spinning. I felt the grit of the concrete on my palms again. "I'm right here," Dante said, his voice a lifeline in the dark. He did not move. He did not touch me. He just stayed, his presence an anchor. I kept going. I told him about the laugh. I told him about the ring on his pinky. I told him the words he whispered, the things he said to make me feel small, to make me feel like nothing. I spoke the words into the sterile office, and they became real, filling the air with their poison. My voice broke. It cracked and hitched. I was not Lena Moretti, the woman who made sauce with Mrs. Bianchi. I was the girl on the pavement, the girl in the dark. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, heavy blanket that was suffocating me. I felt dirty. I felt ruined. I told him how he had left me there, how I had crawled back to my apartment. I told him everything. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavier than any sound. My entire body was shaking, a deep, rattling tremor I could not control. I was looking at my hands, twisted in my lap, tears streaming down my face and dripping onto my jeans. After a long moment, Dante reached forward and pressed the button. The small red light went out. It was done. The silence that followed was the sound of the world ending, the strength that had held me together, the defiant yes I had given him. All of it crumbled. I scrambled up from the sofa, a raw animal sound tearing from my throat. I could not be in that room. I could not be in my own skin. "Lena," he started, standing up. I ran. I did not know where I was going. I just ran down the hall, my breath sobbing in my chest, until I found a small guest bathroom. I threw myself inside and slammed the door, fumbling with the lock. I fell against the sink, staring at my reflection in the mirror. It was the girl from my apartment bathroom, the hollow eyes, the pale, terrified face. He had brought her back. I was going to be sick. I leaned over the toilet, retching, but there was nothing to come up. It was just dry, painful heaves that tore at my throat. I was dirty. He was on me again. I could feel his hands. I turned on the faucet, the water scalding hot. I grabbed the small, jasmine-scented bar of soap and I started scrubbing my hands, my arms, my face. I scrubbed until my skin was raw, bright red, but I could not get clean. The sobs were choking me, ripping out of me with a violence that scared me. I was breaking apart. A soft knock came at the door. "Lena?" It was Dante. "Go away," I screamed, my voice raw. "Don't look at me. Just go away." I slid down the locked door, my back pressed against the wood, and buried my face in my knees. I was the girl in the stairwell all over again. He did not go away. He did not rattle the knob. He did not raise his voice. I just heard a sound, a shifting of weight. He had sat down on the other side of the door. He was in the hallway, sitting on the floor, waiting. "You're safe," he said, his voice low, muffled by the heavy wood. "It's over, Lena. You did it." "I'm not," I sobbed. "I'm still there. I can't get out." "Yes, you can," he said. His voice was so calm, so steady. It was the same voice from the stairwell, the same voice from the nightmare. "You're not in that alley. You're in my home. You're in the hallway outside the library. Mrs. Bianchi is baking bread. I can smell it. Can you smell it?" I could not. All I could smell was the metallic tang of fear. "It's rosemary," he continued, his voice a low, steady rumble. "She's making focaccia for dinner. She said you showed her how to get the crust right." He just kept talking. He did not talk about Rico. He did not talk about the recording. He talked about the garden, about the old stone bench I liked. He talked about a hawk he had seen that morning. He talked about anything and everything. His voice a solid, unwavering presence on the other side of the wood. He just sat there and poured his stillness into the silence, demanding nothing, just offering. My sobs slowly quieted. The shaking in my hands began to ease. The smell of jasmine and soap started to replace the smell of the alley. I was not on the cold concrete. I was on a warm, polished wood floor. I sat there, my cheek pressed against the door, and I just listened to him breathe. Finally, after maybe 30 minutes, I reached up and, with a trembling hand, I unlocked the door. I pulled it open. He was sitting right there, his back against the opposite wall, his long legs stretched out into the hall. He looked up, his dark eyes searching mine. He did not look at my tear-streaked face, at my red, scrubbed skin, with pity. He just looked at me. He stood up in one fluid, graceful motion. I did not say anything. I did not have to. I took one step out of the bathroom and walked straight into him. His arms came around me instantly, wrapping me in a crushing, solid embrace. He did not pat my back. He did not murmur comforts. He just held me, his arms a steel cage, his body a fortress. He buried his face in my hair, one hand cradling the back of my head, holding me against his chest as if he was trying to physically absorb the pain. I wrapped my arms around his waist, my fingers clutching the fine wool of his suit jacket, and I just stood there, breathing him in, the smell of him, clean and sharp, and the solid, steady beat of his heart under my ear. He held me until I stopped shaking. He held me until my breathing was even. He held me until I was no longer the girl in the bathroom, but just Lena. And in the silence of that hallway, I knew I would have done it 10 times over for him. The house changed after that. The air, which had been tense, became sharp. It was stillness before a lightning strike. Dante was in his office constantly. He and Marco were always in motion, their voices low. I stayed out of the way. I stayed in the kitchen with Mrs. Bianchi. I stayed in the garden. I was a different kind of ghost now, one who belonged, but who was waiting. 2 days after the recording, I was walking past the office, and the door was ajar. I heard my own voice. It was just a whisper, thin and trembling. He laughed. He said I was nobody. I froze. My stomach turned to ice. Dante was in there, playing it. I saw Marco through the crack in the door. He was standing in front of Dante's desk, his face grim. "It's done," Marco said. "The recording, a copy of it, was delivered to the Orvallo representative an hour ago, through a source he trusts." "Good." Dante's voice was cold. "Now we wait." We did not have to wait long. The next afternoon, Marco burst into the dining room, where I was having a late lunch. Dante was not there. "He's gone," Marco said to me, his eyes wide, a strange, grim smile on his face. "Who's gone?" "The Orvallo man, the cartel rep. He checked out of his hotel this morning. He's on a private plane back to Mexico. The deal is dead. Lena, you killed it." Later that evening, Dante found me on the terrace, the same one where we had first kissed. He was calm. For the first time since I had met him, the exhaustion seemed to have lifted. The constant simmering anger in his eyes was banked. "It worked," he said, standing beside me at the stone balustrade. "Marco told me. The cartel left." "They left," Dante agreed, "but not for the reasons you think. Not out of morality. They are not good men." He looked out over the dark valley. "They backed off because your testimony did exactly what I hoped it would. It did not make Rico look evil. It made him look stupid. It made him look reckless, weak, and impulsive." He turned to me. "A man like that, who attacks a woman for no reason, who brings this kind of attention to himself, who is stupid enough to get caught, is not a man they can do business with. He's a liability. And your recording, combined with the rumors I've been seeding for a week, proved that the woman he attacked was now under my protection." He let that hang in the air. "He did not make me look weak," Dante said, his voice soft. "He made me look terrifying. The cartel wants no part of a war with a man who would burn the city down for one person. You did not just expose him. Lena, you cemented my reputation." I processed this. It was a dark, twisted logic, but it was the logic of his world. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now, he has nothing," Dante said. "His cartel partners are gone. I leaked other parts of the audio. The parts about his threats, his bragging to his own allies. His crew is abandoning him. They're afraid of the cartel and they're afraid of me. He has no money, no muscle, and nowhere to go. He will run." A wave of relief, so profound it made my knees weak, washed over me. "It's over." "Almost," he said. He took my hand, his palm warm and calloused against mine. "I need to send you away. Lena, just for a little while. I have a car waiting. It will take you to a private airfield. Sophia will go with you. There is a house in the mountains. Very quiet. No one will ever find you there. Just until I have cleaned this up." He wanted to send me away. He wanted to hide me. I looked at our joined hands. I thought of the girl in the stairwell, the girl in the locker room, the girl in the bathroom. He had found me every time. He had protected me. But I was not that girl anymore. I turned and faced him, my hand tightening in his. "No," I said. His brow furrowed. "No? Lena, this is not a request. It's for your safety. Rico is a cornered animal. He's dangerous." "I'm not going," I said, my voice quiet but as hard as the stone under my feet. "I started this. I sat in that chair, and I went back to that alley for you. I will be here when it ends." I looked up, meeting his dark, intense gaze. "You don't get to finish this without me." He stared at me, his expression unreadable. He saw the defiance, the steel in my spine that he himself had helped forge. He saw the woman I had become in his house, under his protection. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was not a smile of humor, it was a smile of respect. "All right," he said, his voice a low rumble, "but we do it my way." My way meant we left that night. There was no big, armed convoy. It was just Dante's armored truck, the one we had taken from the explosion. Dante drove. I sat in the passenger seat. Marco and 2 other guards were in a second, identical truck, following 100 yards behind us. We drove out of the estate and away from the city, heading deep into the wooded, empty hills of the countryside. The truck was dark, the only light coming from the faint green glow of the dashboard. The silence was thick, charged with anticipation. I watched his hands on the steering wheel, strong, steady, capable, the hands that had held me, and the hands that had, I had no doubt, taken lives. "Dante," I said, my voice small in the quiet cab. "Yes. After this, when it's clean, what will you do?" He was silent for a long time, his eyes fixed on the dark, winding road. "I don't know," he said, and the honesty in his voice made my chest ache. This is all I have ever done. Protect, avenge, hold territory. It's been my entire life since my sister." He glanced at me, his profile a hard, beautiful silhouette in the dim light. "But maybe," he said, his voice so quiet I had to lean closer to hear him, "maybe I'll stop waking up angry. Maybe I'll finally sleep beside someone. It was not a promise. It was a confession. It was a future he had not allowed himself to even imagine until now. And it was all for me. My hand found his on the center console. I threaded my fingers through his. He gripped my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. We drove for another hour. We turned off the main road onto a dirt track, overgrown and forgotten. The truck's headlights cut through a tunnel of dead trees. At the end of it was a pair of rusted, crumbling iron gates, hanging open on their hinges. We had arrived at the old Calderon mansion. Dante parked the truck in the shadow of a massive, dead oak tree. He cut the engine. The silence of the woods rushed in. Marco's truck parked 50 yards back, its lights dark. Dante turned to me. His face was all shadows. "They will go in the back," he whispered. "I will go in the front. You will stay in this truck. It's armored. You will lock the doors. You will not get out, no matter what you hear." "Dante, no," I said. "I'm not waiting in the car. I am not the girl in the car." "This is not a negotiation, Lena," he said, his voice a low, harsh whisper. "You're right," I said. I pulled my hand from his and opened the door. He cursed, a low, vicious sound, and got out after me. He grabbed my arm, spinning me around. "What do you think you are doing?" he hissed, his eyes black with fury. "I am finishing this," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You can bring me, or I will follow you, but I am not waiting." He stared at me, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. For a second, I thought he would physically pick me up and throw me back in the truck. Instead, he reached into the waistband at the back of his trousers and pulled out a small, black pistol. It was heavy and cold, and it looked impossibly deadly. He pressed it into my hand, closing my fingers around the grip. "You will stay behind me," he ordered, his voice iron. "You will do exactly as I say. You will not use this unless I am on the ground. This is not for him. This is for you, to get back to the truck. Do you understand?" I nodded, my hand steady on the weapon. "I understand." We walked toward the house. It was a skeleton, a dark, crumbling ruin against the faint moonlight. The front doors were gone, leaving a gaping, black mouth. We stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of mold, dead leaves, and rat droppings. Dante moved like a panther, his own gun in his hand, a seamless shadow in the darkness. I stayed right behind him, my footsteps silent on the rotted floorboards. We found him in what must have been a ballroom. Moonlight streamed in from a collapsed section of the ceiling, illuminating a circle of dusty floor. He was there, Rico. He was not the slick, confident gangster from my memory. He was a cornered rat. His cheap suit was stained and torn. His face was pale, his eyes wide and frantic, glittering with a mixture of drugs and terror. He was holding a pistol, his hand shaking. He was muttering to himself, pacing the circle of light. Then he saw us. He froze. A high-pitched, hysterical laugh bubbled out of him. "Dante Valenci," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Finally, you come yourself, and you brought the whore." He pointed the gun at me, and I flinched, but I did not hide. I stayed right behind Dante's shoulder. "Come to watch, Principessa," Rico mocked, his eyes wild. "Come to see what a real man does? You should have stayed gone. Dante, this is my city now." Dante did not say a word. He did not posture. He did not threaten. He just moved. It was so fast. It was not a movie. It was not a dramatic standoff. It was just violence, sudden and brutal. Rico fired first, a wild shot that went high, shattering a piece of plaster. The sound was a cannon blast in the enclosed space. Dante did not fire. He moved to the side, using the darkness as a shield. Another shot. I heard the zing of a bullet tearing through the air, and Dante grunted, a sharp intake of breath. He had been hit. He stumbled, but he did not fall. He raised his own weapon and fired twice. 2 clean, precise shots. Rico screamed. It was not a roar of anger. It was a high, thin wail of pain. He dropped his pistol, clutching his shoulder as dark blood bloomed through his white shirt. He looked at Dante, his eyes wide with shock, and then he turned to run, scrambling for a dark doorway on the far side of the room. Dante started to move, but he was slow. He was clutching his left arm, his sleeve already dark and wet. He was grazed. Rico was going to get away. I did not think. I just moved. I ran from behind Dante, cutting off the angle, and I was suddenly in the doorway before he could reach it. He crashed to a halt, finding me in his path. He froze. His eyes, wide with terror, looked at me, and then at the small, black pistol in my hand, which I was holding with both hands, pointing straight at his chest. This was it, the alley, in reverse. I was the one standing. He was the one trapped. I had the power. I could end it. I could pull the trigger and erase him. He saw it in my eyes. He whimpered, a pathetic animal sound, and raised his good hand. Please, please, don't. The monster was gone. All that was left was a small, terrified, bleeding man. Behind me, I could hear Dante shouting my name, but it was distant. It was just me and him. I looked at his face, the face that had haunted my nightmares. I looked at the gun in my hand. Slowly, I lowered the pistol. My hand flashed out. I slapped him. I slapped him with all my strength, all the fear, all the rage, all the shame of the last few weeks. The sound was a sharp, clean crack, a final punctuation mark. He stumbled back, his head snapping to the side, a red mark blooming on his pale cheek. He stared at me, his mouth open, in stunned, total defeat. I stepped toward him, my voice low, shaking, but clear as a bell in the dead, quiet hall. You don't get to ruin another second of me. The slap echoed in the vast, dead ballroom. It was the only sound, the single sharp crack that had replaced the roar of gunfire. Rico Calderone stood frozen, his hand on his bleeding shoulder, his head still turned from the force of my blow. The red mark on his cheek was a vivid stain of humiliation, starker than the blood seeping through his fingers. His mouth hung open. The monster was gone. The man who had haunted my sleep and poisoned my life was just a small, pathetic, bleeding boy. Behind me, Dante was leaning against the doorframe, his breath ragged. His left arm was dark with blood, but his gun was steady, aimed not at Rico, but at the empty space beside him, a silent, lethal warning. "Lena," he breathed, his voice a low, strained command. "Move away from him." I did not take my eyes off Rico. I took one step back, my hand, which was still holding the small pistol, falling to my side. I had not fired. I had not needed to. The sound of heavy boots on the ruined floor broke the silence. Marco appeared in the doorway, followed by two other men. They were a seamless, professional darkness. They took in the scene in a fraction of a second. Dante wounded, me standing, Rico defeated. Marco looked at Dante, his gaze flicking to the bloody arm. Dante just shook his head, a minimal gesture. He was fine. Dante looked at Rico, and the cold, terrifying stillness of the boss settled back over his features. The brief, pained grunt from the bullet was gone. The man who had confessed his anger in the dark was gone. The king was back. "Oh, get him out of my sight," Dante ordered, his voice flat. Marco and one of the men moved. They did not rush. They grabbed Rico by his good arm and his torn suit jacket. He did not fight. He was utterly broken, whimpering as they dragged him across the dusty floor. "Wait," I said. They stopped. Even Dante looked at me. Rico, his head hanging, looked up. His eyes were dead. I walked to him. I did not feel fear. I did not feel rage. I felt empty. I felt a strange, cold calm. I knelt in front of him, and he flinched, expecting another blow. I reached out, and, with my thumb and forefinger, I took the silver pinky ring off his hand, the ring I had seen glinting in the dark of the alley. I held it up. "You are nothing," I whispered, using his own words. "You are nobody." I stood up and tossed the ring. It skittered across the floor and disappeared into a pile of rubble. I turned my back on him. "Take him." This time, I did not watch. I heard him being dragged out, a sound of muffled sobbing and scraping boots. I heard the engine of the second truck start up outside. I stood in the center of the moonlight, my back to the door. I heard Dante's slow, steady footsteps approach. He stopped just behind me. I could feel the heat of his body. "You called Scanlon?" Dante asked, his voice low. "He's waiting," Marco replied from the doorway. "He understands the terms." "Good," Dante said. "Tell him I have a package for him, a permanent one. I want it lost. Make sure he understands. He will never walk Del Mar Heights again. He will never see the sun again. He will simply be gone." "Yes, boss," Marco said, and then he, too, was gone. Silence. The vast, ruined ballroom was empty, except for us. The only sound was the wind whistling through the collapsed ceiling. The small, black pistol in my hand was suddenly the heaviest thing in the world. My fingers, which had been so steady, began to shake. I could not hold it. It clattered to the floor, loud in the absolute quiet. The adrenaline, the rage, the ice-cold calm, it all evaporated in an instant. It left a vacuum, and the sheer, crushing weight of the last few weeks rushed in to fill it. My legs gave out. I did not faint, I did not fall, I just collapsed. My body could not hold me up anymore. He was there before I hit the floor. Dante caught me, his good arm wrapping around my waist, his wounded arm supporting my back. He grunted in pain but did not let go. He lowered us both to the floor, sitting against a crumbling pillar, pulling me into him. I was shaken, but I was calm. The nightmare was over. The ghost was exorcised. I turned in his hold, burying my face in the space between his neck and shoulder. He smelled of sweat, gun smoke, and the faint metallic tang of his own blood. I wrapped my arms around his waist, clinging to him. "It's done. Lena," he whispered, his voice rough with pain and relief. He pressed his lips to the top of my head. "It's over. You're safe." I did not cry. I just held on, anchoring myself to his solid, living warmth. I was alive. He was alive. And the monster was gone. The drive back to the estate was a quiet, exhausted blur. I sat pressed against his side in the dark cab of the truck. I had used the first aid kit to clean and bind his arm. The bullet had gone clean through the flesh of his bicep. It was painful, but it was not dangerous. He had barely flinched as I worked, his eyes never leaving my face. When we arrived, the house was blazing with lights. Every guard was on the perimeter, a silent, waiting army. Luca was standing at the front door. His face was granite, unreadable. He looked at Dante, at the bloody bandage on his arm, and then he looked at me. His eyes, usually so cold and professional, widened just a fraction. He looked at me not as the boss's protected girl, but as the woman who had walked into the fire with him and come back out. He gave me a sharp, respectful nod, then opened the door. The entire household was waiting in the foyer. Mrs. Bianchi was there, her hands twisting in her apron, her face pale. Sophia stood behind her, her arms crossed, her expression tight. "Mrs." Bianchi rushed forward, letting out a stream of rapid, worried Italian, fussing over Dante's arm. "It's just a graze, Anna," he said gently, patting her hand. "I am fine." Sophia looked at me. Her dark eyes swept over my dusty clothes, my tangled hair. She did not smile, but the hard, analytical line of her mouth softened. "Welcome home, Miss Moretti," she said. That night, the estate was quiet, but it was not tense. It was the quiet of relief. The men, Marco's team, were in the kitchen, their voices low. I heard the clink of glasses, a quiet celebration. I left Dante with Mrs. Bianchi, who insisted on redressing his wound properly. I went to my room and stood under a scalding hot shower for 20 minutes, washing away the dust of the Calderone mansion. But this time, I was not scrubbing. I was not trying to peel away a stain. I was just washing off the dirt of the day. When I was clean, wrapped in a soft robe, I went looking for him. He was not in his office, not in his bedroom. I found him where I knew he would be, on the stone terrace, under the stars. He was standing at the balustrade, a glass of whiskey in his good hand. He was in a clean shirt, the sleeve rolled up to accommodate the white bandage on his arm. He did not turn as I approached. He had heard me. I stood beside him, not touching, just sharing the silence. The air was cold, but I did not feel it. "What will happen to him?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Rico?" He took a slow sip. "Scanlon is a corrupt police captain I have owned for a very long time. Rico Calderon will be booked into a county holding cell under a false name tomorrow. He will be transferred to a federal penitentiary in a state far from here. He will be placed in the general population. He will not have his name, his money, or his protection. He will be a nobody, just like he always wanted you to be. He will be alive, but he will wish he was dead within a week." It was cold, dark, and perfect justice. I felt nothing but relief. "It's really over," I whispered. "It's over." We were quiet for a long time, just looking at the pinpricks of light from the distant, sleeping city. "You said in the truck," I started, my voice hesitant, "that maybe you would stop waking up angry." He turned to look at me, his face half in shadow, half in moonlight. "I woke up angry every day for 10 years. Lena, ever since my sister, I woke up, and the world was wrong. The men who hurt her were free. The world was full of men like them. So I built this house, this family, this armor. I built it to fight them." He looked down at his glass, and today, in that house, I did not feel angry. When I saw him, I did not feel rage. I just felt tired. "And then?" I asked. "And then I saw you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I saw you stand in front of him. I saw you take back your power, and the anger was just gone." "I've spent my whole life being invisible," I said, looking at my hands on the cold stone. "I thought that was how I would survive. If no one saw me, no one could hurt me." "I see you," he said. I looked up at him. I reached out, my fingers tracing the white bandage on his arm. "This is new?" He nodded. My hand moved from his arm, up to his chest. I felt the hard, steady beat of his heart. My fingers brushed against the top of his shirt, and I felt it. Just through the cotton, a raised line of skin. "This one is older," I whispered. He flinched, but it was not from pain. He covered my hand with his, holding it flat against his chest, against the scar. "Afghanistan," he said, his voice rough. "A lifetime ago, before my father died, before I had to come home and take over." He held my gaze, his eyes dark and intense. "It's the only other time I've been shot, the only other time I was careless." I looked at him, the most powerful, dangerous man in Delmare Heights, and I saw the layers of him, the soldier, the brother, the boss, the man who had sat outside a bathroom door for me. "I'm so proud of you, Lena," he whispered, his voice thick. He leaned in and kissed me. It was not the desperate, hesitant kiss from before. It was slow and deep and full of a reverence that made my heart ache. He pulled back, his eyes searching mine. Then he bent, sliding his good arm under my legs and his wounded arm around my back, and he lifted me. I wrapped my arms around his neck, and he carried me from the terrace, through the dark, silent house. He did not take me to my room. He took me to his. He laid me on the bed, following me down, his body half covering mine. He was careful of his arm. He kissed me again, and this time, it was not just tender, it was hungry. This was not the first time, but it felt new. The first time had been about safety, about reclaiming, about finding an anchor in the storm. This was different. This was a celebration. His hands were confident, his mouth possessive. He kissed my jaw, my neck, his lips tracing the skin down to my collarbone. "You were magnificent," he breathed against my skin. "You were terrified, and you were magnificent. You are not a victim, Lena. You are a queen." I was not the broken girl from the stairwell. I was not hiding. My hands were as hungry as his. I explored him, my fingers tracing the hard planes of his chest, the line of his stomach. the scar that I had only felt through his shirt. I was not just receiving comfort, I was an active participant, I was his equal. Our love scene was not a frantic, desperate coupling. It was a slow, confident dance of two people who had seen the worst of the world and the worst of each other, and had chosen to stay. It was a joining of two survivors, a fusion of his strength and my resilience. It was tender, and it was raw, and it was the most real thing I had ever known. Later, tangled in the cool sheets, the moon painting our skin in silver, he held me against his side. His breathing was deep and even. He was asleep. For the first time, maybe in 10 years, he was not angry. He was at peace. I woke to the bright light of morning, and he was already awake, leaning on his good elbow, watching me. His hair was messy, and the shadow of a beard was on his jaw. He looked younger. "Good morning," I whispered, my voice sleepy. "Good morning," he replied, his voice a low rumble. He smiled, a real, actual smile. It transformed his face, chasing away the last of the shadows. He reached for the nightstand, his fingers fumbling in the drawer. He pulled something out. "I had this made for you," he said. He dropped a key into my open palm. It was heavy and cold and ornate. It was a key to the front gate. My breath caught. "It's not a key to a cage, Lena," he said softly, his eyes serious. "It's a key to the gate. It means you are free. You can leave any time. No one will ever stop you. I will have a car fully gassed and stocked for you, and a bank account in your name. You are free." He paused, and his smile faded, replaced by a raw vulnerability that cracked my heart open. "But I'd rather you stayed." I looked at the key, the symbol of the freedom I had craved my entire life, safety, an exit, a way out. I closed my hand around the cold metal, my fingers curling tight. "A month ago," I said, my voice quiet, "this is all I would have wanted, a way to run, a way to be invisible again." I looked up, meeting his intense, hopeful gaze. "But I don't want to just be safe anymore. Dante, I don't want to hide in a house in the mountains. I want a life. My life." I reached out and placed the key back on the nightstand. "And I want you in it." His answering smile was slow and brilliant, and it was everything. The months that followed were a quiet rebuilding. The world did not stop, but it shifted. Rico Calderone was gone. He had vanished into the federal prison system, a ghost. His syndicate, without its head and without its cartel backing, had crumbled to dust. Dante's men had reabsorbed the territory, the port warehouse, the diner. The diner. Dante had offered it to me. I had refused. Instead, I started to bake. I had loved it. Once, before my life had shrunk to late shifts and survival. Now, with Mrs. Bianchi's delighted encouragement, I took over the estate's kitchen. I found my old textbooks. I experimented. I made brioche, croissants, and delicate lemon tarts. I was not just surviving. I was creating. And Dante was changing too. He was still the boss. He was still feared. But his legacy was shifting. I saw him in his office, not with Marco and maps of war, but with architects and lawyers. He was turning the Valenci name from one of bloodshed to one of power. He was buying properties, investing in legitimate businesses, building something that would last. He was building a world he had promised, one she would never fear again. One evening, 3 months after the night at the mansion, he came to me in the kitchen. I was covered in flour, my hair in a messy bun. He handed me a heavy, cream-colored envelope. It was an invitation, a charity gala for the Delmarais Heights Children's Hospital. "We're going," he said. "Dante, we can't," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "People will see us. Your enemies." "Let them," he said. He took my flour-dusted hand and kissed my palm. "I'm tired of hiding you. I'm tired of hiding us. We will go, as Mr. and Mrs. Costa." The ballroom was a sea of glittering diamonds and black ties. It was the world of the penthouse apartment, a world of glass and steel and cold money. I had never felt more out of place. I wore a red dress. It was a simple, silk dress, the color of a deep, bold wine. It left my shoulders bare. My hair was up, and for the first time in my life, I wore diamonds, a simple necklace Dante had clasped around my throat. I was terrified, but as I walked in, with Dante's hand possessively on the small of my back, I did not hide. I held my head high. We were Mr. and Mrs. Costa. We smiled, we drank champagne. We were, for all the world, just another wealthy couple. And then I saw him. Across the room, an older man with silver hair and cold, reptilian eyes was watching us. He was standing with a group of politicians. "Dante," I whispered, my hand tightening on his arm. "I see him," Dante said, his voice calm. "Antonio Gravina, an old rival. Don't look at him." But it was too late. Gravina had seen Dante, a slow, oily smirk spread across his face. He saw Dante Valenci, the phantom of the underworld, at a charity ball. He saw a man gone soft. He saw weakness. He excused himself from the politicians and began to walk toward us, a shark cutting through the water. My heart started to pound. This was a different kind of fight. Dante did not move, just sipped his champagne. Gravina got closer. He was 10 feet away. His smirk widened. And then he saw me. He saw me standing next to Dante, not behind him. He saw the red dress. He saw the diamonds. He saw that I was not flinching. I was not hiding. I was meeting his cold gaze with a quiet, steady calm of my own. I smiled at him. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who had faced her monster in a ruined house and had not blinked. Gravina stopped. His smirk faltered. He looked from my face to Dante's hand, which was resting on my waist. He looked at Dante's eyes, and he did not see weakness. He saw a possessiveness that was more absolute than any army. He saw a man who was not soft, but who had found something new to protect, something infinitely more dangerous. He realized this was not a surrender. This was a new front. Antonio Gravina, one of the most feared men on the coast, slowly nodded, not to Dante, but to me. And then he turned and retreated, melting back into the crowd. Dante looked down at me, his eyes dark with a fierce, burning pride. "You did that," he whispered, his hand tightening on my waist. I leaned into him, adjusting the cuff of his jacket. We did. The world did not stay quiet, but it became our quiet. 6 months passed, autumn bled into a cold, sharp winter, and then gave way to the first, fragile green of spring. The city of Delmare Heights went on, oblivious to the war that had almost torn it apart, the war that had been fought in the shadows of its penthouses and the ruins of its forgotten mansions. Rico Calderone was a name that was never spoken. He was a ghost. We never learned his final fate, only that he was gone. Dante had ensured it, whether he was dead to the underworld, rotting in some offshore prison, or buried in the foundations of a new building. It did not matter. He was erased. Life settled into a new rhythm, one defined not by fear, but by purpose. I did not stay the protected woman in the stone fortress. I could not. I had to build something that was mine. I opened a bakery. It was not a fancy, glittering shop in the wealthy part of town. It was a small, warm corner in my old neighborhood, just 3 blocks from the diner, which was now under new, quiet Valenci management. The sign on the window was simple, the Front Step Bakery. Dante had financed it, of course. The money had appeared in a new bank account, the lease signed by a holding company he owned. It was all anonymous, all at arm's length. He understood that this had to be mine. He gave me the tools, but he let me build the house. I woke up every morning at 4, in his bed. In the quiet of the estate, I would slide out from under his arm, his breathing deep and steady beside me. I would drive into the city in the dark, my small car a familiar, safe cocoon. I would let myself into the warm, dark bakery, and I would turn on the ovens. The smell of yeast and cardamom and baking bread became my new perfume. It was the smell of creation, not decay. The neighborhood, which had once been a map of my fears, became my home again. The people who had whispered about me in the diner now came in for coffee and croissants. They did not know my story. They just knew I was Lena, the girl who had come back, the girl who made the best almond tarts in the city. But the bakery was more than just a bakery. On Tuesday nights, after I had locked the front door at 6, I would pull the curtains, I would make a large pot of tea, and I would set out a plate of day-old scones. And then, one by one, they would come. They came in through the back door. They were waitresses from the diner. They were women from the shelters. They were wives of men who drank too much and husbands of men who had cold, hard hands. They were women who were, or had been, abused. We called it Tuesday night tea. I never told them my story, not the whole truth. I did not need to. They saw it in my eyes. They saw it in the way I had rebuilt my life. My story spread, not as a headline, but as a quiet, coded whisper. Go see Lena at the front step. She understands. She got out. We would sit in a small circle, in the warm, flower-dusted dark, and we would talk. We would share stories. We would cry. We would hold each other's hands. We were a quiet, secret army, healing ourselves with words and shared strength. I was not just baking. I was building a new kind of safe house. And Dante was changing too. He was still the head of the Valenci family. He was still a man to be feared. The underworld of Del Mar Heights still answered to his silent authority. But the authority was different now. The noise and bloodshed that had defined his hunt for Rico had receded. Dante still ruled, but he ruled quietly. He was shifting his focus, moving the vast Valenci wealth. He was becoming legitimate. I saw the blueprints on his desk, the plans for new shipping terminals, for real estate developments, for technology investments. He was trading his reputation for a legacy. He was still staying in the shadows, but he was building an empire in the light. He was still the king, but he was becoming a different kind of king. The old world, however, did not just disappear. It was always there, scratching at the door. One night, Dante came home late. I was asleep, and I woke when he slid into bed. He did not touch me immediately. He just lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. The stillness in him was wrong. It was not the stillness of peace. It was the stillness of a coiled snake. "What is it?" I whispered, turning to face him. He was silent for a long time. "The Orvalos are back," he finally said, his voice flat. My blood ran cold. The cartel. "Not a war," he said quickly, as if sensing my panic. "Just a message. A new representative came to the city today. He requested a meeting with Marco. What did he want?" "Tribute," Dante said, and the single word was full of a cold, quiet anger. "They want a percentage of the port operations, the ones the Calderones used to run. They see it as a debt owed." "What did you tell him?" I asked, though I already knew. Marco told him no. I told him no. "Dante, is that safe?" I whispered. "You said to yourself, they are butchers." "They are," he said, "but they are also businessmen. They respect strength. They do not respect weakness. If I pay them tribute once, I will be paying them for the rest of my life. I will be their servant in my own city." He turned his head on the pillow, his dark eyes finding mine in the gloom. "I am not weak. I will not bend. I sent them a message back." "What message?" "I bought the hotel they were meeting in. This afternoon, I had an eviction notice delivered to the representative's room, along with a bottle of my finest whiskey and a note." "What did the note say?" "It said, 'Enjoy the drink. It's the only thing you will ever get from me in this city.' And I signed my name." A shiver went down my spine. It was not a declaration of war. It was a line drawn in concrete. A silent, brutal standoff had begun. There would be no blood. Not yet. But the message was clear. Dante Valenci was not afraid, and he was not weak. He ruled, absolutely. He reached for me then, pulling me against his chest. His heart was not pounding. It was slow, steady, and sure. "It is handled. Mia cara," he whispered, his lips brushing my hair. "Go back to sleep." But the old world was not done with me either. It happened a week later. I was walking from the bakery to my car. It was late, after one of our Tuesday night meetings. The street was dark, the lamps casting pools of weak, yellow light. The neighborhood was quiet. A man stepped out of an alley. He was not Rico. He was a stranger, thin and jittery, his eyes wide and bright with a familiar, desperate hunger, a new player, someone from a splintered gang trying to make a name. Well, he said, his voice a low rasp. Lena Moretti, the boss's girl. Heard you run this street now. I froze. My heart, which I had thought incapable of that kind of fear, gave a painful, lurching thud. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my voice steady. I clutched my keys in my hand, the teeth pointing out. Oh, I think you do, he sneered, taking a step closer. He pulled a small knife from his pocket, the blade glinting in the lamplight. See, the Calderones are gone, and that leaves a lot of room for new management. And taking out Valenci's pet project, that would send a real message. He lunged. I did not scream. I did not run. Dante had spent months training me. Not just me, but all the women at the Tuesday night meetings. He had sent one of his best men, a quiet, older guard named Sal, to teach us. Not to fight, but to survive, how to use an attacker's weight, how to find the weak points, how to disable, and how to run. The man grabbed my coat. I did not pull away. I went with the pull, slamming my body into his. I drove the jagged edge of my keys, not into his face, but into the soft, vulnerable spot under his jaw. He roared, a wet, gurgling sound, stumbling back, his hand flying to his neck. I did not wait to see. I ran the 2 blocks to my car, my feet pounding the pavement. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sped away, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. I did not go back to the estate. I drove to the penthouse, the glass fortress in the sky, which Dante still kept. I used my own key and let myself in. I sat on the cold leather sofa in the dark, staring at the glittering, indifferent city, and I shook for an hour. When Dante found me there, his face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He had not needed to ask where I was. He knew. He did not ask me what happened. He just knelt in front of me, just as he had in the stairwell, and he took my trembling hands in his. He saw the broken skin on my knuckles. He did not say a word. He just kissed my hands, his lips warm, and then he pulled me to my feet and took me home. The next day, I heard on the local news that an unidentified man had been found in an alley near my bakery. He was not dead. He was, however, severely beaten, with 2 broken arms and 2 broken legs. He would never walk straight again. Dante never mentioned it. He never said a word. He just made sure that one of his guards, Sal, was parked in an unmarked car across from the bakery every day, from the moment I arrived until the moment I left. That night, I confronted him. I found him in his office, the door open. He was not working. He was just staring at the blueprints for a new community center he was building, a building that would have my name, Moretti, carved in the cornerstone. You did it, I said. He did not pretend to misunderstand. He just looked up, his eyes heavy. Yes. He's not dead. No, he's broken. He will be a message to every other idiot who thinks he can touch you. I walked to his desk. I leaned against it, my arms crossed. I was not angry. I was not afraid. I was just tired. Is this it, Dante? I asked, my voice quiet. Is this our life? I build things, and you break the people who try to tear them down? Is this sustainable? I looked at him, at this powerful, beautiful, dangerous man I loved. Will I ever be able to walk down the street without looking over my shoulder? Will you? Dante stood up. He walked to me, his face etched with a pain that was deeper than any bullet wound. He cupped my face, his hands gentle. I am trying to build a world you'll never fear again, Lena, he confessed, his voice a rough, broken whisper. I thought I could build the walls high enough. I thought I could kill the monsters. He rested his forehead against mine. But I'm beginning to understand. The monsters will always be there. They will always scratch at the door. I cannot make the world safe for you." He pulled back, his eyes searching mine, his hands holding me as if I were the only thing keeping him from sinking. "I can only promise that I will always be the bigger monster. I will always be the one standing between you and the dark. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if it's the life you deserve, but it's the only life I know how to give you." My heart ached for him, for the promise he was trying to keep, the one he had made to his sister's ghost, the one he now made to me. I kissed him. "It's enough," I whispered, "as long as you're standing there with me." That night, the cold of early spring was sharp in the air. I could not sleep. I felt the bed shift as Dante rose, a silent habit he had when his own ghosts were walking. I knew where to find him. I pulled on one of his heavy, black cashmere sweaters. It enveloped me, falling to my knees, smelling of him. I went to the roof. The estate had a vast, flat rooftop terrace, high above the trees. It was his real sanctuary. He was there, at the far edge, leaning against the stone parapet, a cigarette. A rare indulgence for him glowed in his hand, the small red ember a tiny star against the blackness. He was looking down at the city, a glittering carpet of diamonds spread out in the valley below. His city. I walked to him, my bare feet silent on the cold stone. He heard me. He turned, and the hard lines of his face softened as he saw me. He held out his arm, and I walked into his embrace, sliding under his heavy wool coat, pressing myself against the warmth of his chest. He wrapped the coat around me, cocooning us both, his one arm a steel band around my waist. We stood there, two shadows against the stars, watching our world. The wind was cold. It pulled at my hair, but I was not cold. "Don't ever let go of me," I whispered, my voice muffled against his sweater. He stiffened, and his arm tightened, pulling me so close I could barely breathe. He bent his head, his lips pressing against my hair, his voice a low, absolute vow in the cold night air. Never again. We held each other, bound not by fear but by a choice. We knew the world was dark. We knew the monsters were real, but we also knew that love, like power, was not a given. It was a vow. It was a fortress. It was something you protect. He looked at her, not as something broken, but as the only thing in his world worth keeping whole. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more. Please share your thoughts on the story in English. We cannot wait to read them.